Some reflections on Zeus Meilichios. Um, so Zeus Meilichios, we could ask, is it correct to say that Zeus Meilichios is the autochthonous, which is say the first um, form of Zeus, as the chthonic Zeus, and associated with the bearded snake? So I find a very interesting coordinate here to consider what happens when we take up these matters in a sort of absolute way, as I think dominates the Athenian thinking. So if the first Zeus is this bearded snake, what's the thing about this snake that's gives the snake its what's the key exemplum of the snake for the Greeks, and why is it called this Zeus the kind one, or Zeus the mild one, as we should translate this term? It's a sort of like, there's something that appears ferocious, but then it turns out to be doing something good. So if you think of snakes in a tomb, then the idea is the tomb robbers, to some extent, the ferociousness of the snakes scares off the tomb robbers who don't want to get bit by the poisonous ones. And so the snakes turn out to guard everyone against the miasma of the disturbance of the corpses and of the tombs. So the snakes turns out to be doing something good for the, as it were, it's hard to say. So there's this very difficult question is raised about Homeric thinking, whereby one thing that's at issue is whether in every verse of Iliad and Odyssey, however fine and refined and most perfect they are the true revelation of the early Greek so-called religion, or cult and ritual, or let's say, myth and ritual, I should say. So in early Greek thinking, we have this specific version of some kind of negotiation with respect to things that might have otherwise been construed as evil, and sort of saying, well, it's okay that snakes are a perpetual issue because it's wise that things are set up this way. Now consider as an analogy, which is a type of, I think Aristotle thinks analogy is like the best type of metaphor. There's other kinds, switching out genus and species, but he thinks that analogy is the most human kind, and it has the most benefit for human beings. Of course, it plays a central role in Western legal practice, whether analogy is good or whether it fails. I think there's an analogy on this, the way the snake is treated in this question of the chthonic Zeus, the Zeus who can be propitiated, as the question of whether the Zeus is the original Zeus, or even in a certain sense, the originary Zeus is the one that has the most power in the idea of Zeus somehow, or in Zeus, as it were. It's better to just say or in Zeus, and leave this analysis of the so-called most real way of clarifying to ourselves what Zeus is, like whether he's just a fantasy or whether he's this and that can be said for serious people paying attention to Zeus, in favor of or against. But yeah, this is a chthonic Zeus and his snake. Let's compare that to the In Praise of Shadows book, where it's set, the Japanese book, where it's saying there's something un-Japanese about this Western attitude, but I think the Western attitude then he meant the Western attitude that was current around 1900 or so when he wrote his book. This is a few decades off probably, but maybe 1920, I don't know. In Praise of Shadows. It's more like this Simondon version, Gilbert Simondon version, where things come out of step and the carburetor becomes fuel injection system, and you're following these Western paths which are always trying to improve. They come out of step and they have a lot of wiggle, but they're ultimately order and progress in a certain way in their sorga. Whereas the snake version, it's sort of like you're placating it. You're like, okay, there's snakes there. Let's not really try to remove the snake. Let's just say the snakes actually are avoiding miasma because they keep the tomb robbers out, which is actually true to some extent. Then in this In Praise of Shadows version, what he's saying is the Japanese, there's a lot of darkness when it's like night, so before the world we live in. And if you ever go into the wilderness, then you'll learn that. But is that bad? Why is it bad? Maybe being blind is good. Try it sometimes. Just appreciate there's certain things that are nice about being blind. Well, I suppose it's easier to say if you could take the blindfold off, but or maybe it isn't. I don't know, but yeah, the Japanese attitude, according to the author of the In Praise of Shadows, was sort of like, yeah, it's sort of dark here, and there's just a flicker of lamplight, but this is just the exact under these conditions. Let's not try to eradicate them as the Europeans do in their search for sort of crazy sort of jagged movements towards the most perfect. You know, it's because in the Constitution they talk about a more perfect union. Because in Latin the word perfect takes this superlative form and comparative form. Yeah, so he's saying that look at the lacquer look at that red lacquer, that sort of dark red lacquer on the bento boxes when they're made in the traditional way. I think this is actually it's supposed to be seen under this flickering torchlight, and that's when it looks the most. That's when it gives primary joy to human beings. It gives primary joy to human beings when they can have this sort of Marie Kondo thing with their experience of that red lacquer under the torchlight. So they're not trying to create perfect light at night the way the Europeans did. That surely, yeah, isn't it so that it's sort of, how can this not be part of this sort of Indernea technological essence, as Heidegger's describing it as the, and then when Dugin says, oh no, I have the deep wellspring, the orthodox wellspring of the inner man, the passionary and the inner man, and the culture. Because like Dugin says, when he visited some Orthodox priest, wasn't a Russian, but in some other country, they were drinking hard spirits, and every 5 minutes, and it was almost as though they were floating off the ground, and they kept doing it for hour after hour for 7 hours, 8 hours. And he said, I think it's cultural. And then, and the example was given that when Russians drink the vodka, they don't sort of rise up off the ground. They rather to get maudlin and so on, weepy. Yeah, so I don't think the Dasein of the technological essence is evaded by Mr. Dugin, because I think he's also participates in it directly, because this attitude, it's not that he could simply say he's against it. It has to be negotiated with, because if, for example, with the nuclear weapons and with having the best weapons, but also within other ways, economic competition with other ways. The attitude can't simply be evaded if the other countries are doing it, and then it must become internalized. And plus, of course, it was already internalized during the Soviet period. So, it's a difficult thing. I don't know. Even if there's a genuine source of the other Dasein, it's still in the, as it were, all too close to, somebody who's brought a pencil that's writing in the technological language of Galileo's philosophic vacuum of, how should that be understood, of the view. I guess a nice way to think about it, I think, that if you ever read Husserl's final book, you may not really understand it because everything's so detailed. But one way to say it is the philosophy of Überhaupt, Kantian philosophy of Überhaupt, it goes along with this Galilean notion of a perfect vacuum of the inertial frame of reference. And what that does is, instead of throughout history where it's kind of like there's some things that have cycles, so like the forests have a certain cycle, hypokoumenon, the Greeks call it, the oceans with their tidal pools, the phases at the moon. Some things have sort of a, how should it be, predictable, I suppose, predictable, reliable cycles. But then there's all the things human beings do, and then in both realms there's chance. What the philosophy of Überhaupt or the physics, which as for its founding idea, the inertial frame of reference, as our current physics does. What it does is it levels everything. There's no longer you're looking at the phases of the moon or specific actual things. You assume, just as with the problem of dropping something from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which may be apocryphal. Yeah, they should fall at the same. They should fall at the same rate. Oh, but there's something wrong. There's error there. So it's, in a way, it corresponds, and this was actually the real Catholic criticism of it, was it corresponds to what was considered historically a form of fallacious reasoning, which was to say, to take an outlier, extreme outlier case, pure vacuum, it doesn't actually even exist, nobody ever encounters a vacuum, to take an extreme outlier case and argue it against all the cases of experience. Nobody ever experienced a pure vacuum, it doesn't exist, even today. So, I mean, there's always supposedly, some kind of quarks or whatever. There's some kind of field of some kind. There's never the pure vacuum. So we have a case where a kind of reasoning that was considered false by the church then came in and took over certain fields, but the other fields that actually cared about the difference between sort of genericizing everything and then saying, oh, these are the ones that are actually predictable, like the moon, it got displaced. I think that's one way to look at this technological essence as fighting certain forms of particularity.